Okay, pull this up. Okay, do y'all see my full screen, the full PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I'm Laurie Weathersby. I'm the director of the Office of Intervention Services, and we are going to be talking to y'all today about MTSS. As you see here, we have our vision and mission of the board that we start all of our presentations with, along with our 6 strategic goals. So if y'all will just mute yourself, that'll just cut down on any background noise. And then if at any time y'all have questions, just jump in and unmute yourself and ask us a question. You can put a question in the chat box. We'll be keeping up with that. And then also there's that little hand raise. You can raise your hand. So at any time, if you need us to stop and clarify anything, we can do that. So that's the good thing about doing these trainings when it's specific to your district. You have specific questions and we can stop and address them at that time. And if you're having any technical issues, if you can't hear us or you can't see us, let us know and we'll do our best to try to figure them out. We have Jada Brantley with you today. She's one of our academic intervention specialists. Sandy Elliott is our English learner specialist. Ginger Kessler is our behavior specialist, but she's not on the call today. So I'll be presenting her information. And if you have any specific behavior questions for her later, you can definitely reach out for her. She has a lot of great information that she can share with you at another time if you need her to. And then we have Matt Sheriff. He is another academic intervention specialist. He is the newest member to our team, and he is coming from an admin role. So he just brings another level of experience in seeing how interventions can work in a school setting, and specifically the support that it takes from the leadership role. So we've been very happy to have him on our team. So today we have a couple of hours to talk to you about MTSS. So we'll do just a quick overview. We have the new guidance document that is out, so we'll share information on that. We'll talk to you about distance learning and what that looks like now with interventions. Of course, we'll talk to you about tiered support, behavior interventions, the leadership role, and the documentation packet. So we have a lot of information for you today. So like I said, if at any time you have questions, just jump in and ask us. Okay, so before we get started, I know Jada's going to talk to you about MTSS. So Ms. McNair, if you'll tell us what is y'all's plan? Are y'all going back virtual? Are you going back hybrid? Tell us that real quick so that'll give us an idea.
We are starting off virtual, and then we'll eventually move to hybrid.
Okay.
So the first couple of weeks of school, we will be virtual.
Okay. Move to hybrid. Okay. And is that how y'all are rolling it out for K-12?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Jada.
Okay. So we're going to begin by discussing MTSS, the definition of MTSS. But before we begin with the definition, I do want to just say that I have been an interventionist in an elementary situation and in a high school situation and middle school. And so we know that with middle school, with secondary, high school as well, sometimes we have to be a little more flexible with our MTSS decisions than we do at the elementary level, due to things like scheduling, our students being older, types of content areas, classes that they take. So we do understand that it takes a lot of flexibility at the secondary level. MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports. And when a student is part of the MTSS framework and when they are participating in MTSS, they may receive more than one support at a time if that student needs more than one support. So we'll have questions sometimes and people will ask, can they participate in a reading intervention as well as a math intervention? And yes, they can receive more than one support at the time. And that would be decisions that the team would make according to resources and availability. Students sometimes receive behavioral supports in addition to academics. At the secondary level, sometimes that is very important because many times at the secondary level, we know that some of the struggle is actually tied back to the underlying behaviors, and that's why they're struggling academically. And I think I have a lag in my changing of slides. There we go. Okay. So our state definition of MTSS, instead of reading the entire definition to you, let's just talk about some of the high points here that are highlighted in red. So it is a framework. You will use team-based problem solving. So all decisions for MTSS are made by a team. It's not just the responsibility of one person. We definitely use data to make decisions. This framework is flexible. We are going to implement evidence-based instruction and intervention for MTSS to be effective. And also, MTSS is to support students, as I said just a moment ago, with academics and behavior. And it is to support the needs of all students in our building. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about what it is and what it is not. It is not just for struggling students. So students who need enrichment may also be part of the MTSS process. Students who have been identified as being gifted, those who need that extra push, that extra boost, those who are looking to take advanced placement classes, dual enrollment classes, those who are going to leave and go straight to a four-year university. So it's not just for struggling students. It is to meet the needs of all our students. It's not a pre-referral process, and I think this is really important to consider because years ago we thought of MTSS and intervention as a means to get the data that we need to collect our data to show that a student needed to move on for a comprehensive evaluation. And that's just not what MTSS is for now. MTSS is just to support our students to be the best they can be, do the best academically and behaviorally that they may perform. And some of these students will move on and receive referrals to a MET team and even go for comprehensive evaluation, but that's not all that it is for. Let's see. We're not going to make MTSS decisions based on assumptions. We must use our evidence to make these decisions. And when I say all students, I mean any student, an English learner, a student who already has a SPED, an IEP in place for special education services. These students may also be receiving MTSS supports to help them perform to the best of their ability. Okay, so MTSS is comprised of different components and they work together. Each of these components work together simultaneously in a continuation so that we can make the best decisions and support students to the best of our abilities. You'll see each of the components here. We have our shared leadership that may be referred to sometimes as our TST team when we're discussing MTSS. Family, school, and community partnerships. Now, talking about specifically for secondary, I know that in the past I have used my students from middle school and high school as part of this family, school, and community partnership here because these students can be very active parts of decision making for themselves. Data-based problem solving and decision making, layered continuum of supports, which that is actually your tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Evidence-based instruction, intervention, and assessment, and then our universal screening and progress monitoring piece. And again, these are continuously working so that we may constantly have meetings on students and review and re-review data so that we may revise plans if needed. So we've recently released the guidance document, as Laurie said, and we can drop that link in the chat box here in a moment if you want to be able to pull that up. But it is on our website under the Intervention Services tab.
Now you have confirmed it. Hello?
Laurie, you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so let's talk just a minute about what the guidance document is designed to do. It is designed to assist stakeholders in understanding a multi-tiered system of supports. So when we created the guidance document, we took into account which stakeholders we were gearing it towards, and truthfully, it is written so that any stakeholder can pick it up and read it and fully understand MTSS. So, you know, an administrator can pick it up, a parent can pick it up and read our guidance document and get a good understanding. Provide an in-depth look at the essential components of an effective MTSS model. So we go more in depth into each of those components that I just named for you. Clarify the usefulness and value of MTSS in regard to student outcomes, and then explain best practices for the implementation of MTSS for all students. So the guidance document contains best practices, but we also know that you can't use a guidance document in place of training or questioning, because sometimes we'll have a particular situation you have to reach out to from the school. We may need to reach out to district personnel from the school. You guys can always reach out to us at the intervention office for more in-depth training, or if you have a certain situation regarding a student and you just want some guidance and to talk over your team's decision, because we know from experience that MTSS, again, is not a one-size-fits-all. So sometimes we have to
Listen
make
to the MTSS meeting. You got a meeting too.
Okay, so the purpose of the guidance document is to aid in the effective implementation of a three-tiered instructional model. The word effective is extremely important here, because we can implement the MTSS three-tiered model, but we could implement it ineffectively. We need to make sure that we are implementing fidelity and integrity, so that we are receiving effective interventions that will result in the best outcomes for students, behaviorally and academically. We know that we need guidance here in making decisions, and decision-making guidance is also okay. So go over the table of contents very quickly. First, I want to say thank you to the advisory panel that helped. They assisted us in creating the document. We had several discussions, you know, about how it would best support you guys out in the field. And so that's this advisory panel helped us to make those decisions. Anytime that we make decisions in the intervention office, we like to reach out to our districts. We want our teachers and our district personnel to help us make these decisions, because it is all about supporting you guys. So let's see. The section 1 is actually three-tier instructional model, and it basically defines what a three-tier instructional model is. Section 2, our essential components. So it contains the essential components that we here in Mississippi have as part of our MTSS. You can look at other states, pull up their MTSS framework, and their essential components might differ somewhat, but they're going to be very much similar. Some states have social and emotional learning as an essential component, and we here in Mississippi have really started focusing on social emotional learning, and Laurie's going to tell you more about that in a few minutes. But you know, at one point we may decide that that needs to be an actual component, but again, our components are very similar to other states. In section 3, each component is defined more in depth for you. I'd like to point out that component 3, layered continuum of supports, we have the definition here of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. However, when we go to the next slide, you will see that section 5, section 6, and section 7 also contain information on tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, much more in-depth information in each of these sections. So what I really want to point out about the sections and the headings, the titles, and the information within the sections is it's really woven throughout the document. So someone might say, well, where will I find behavioral supports? Well, it's going to be section 8. However, there's behavioral information woven throughout the entire document. So it's you know, you may not pick it up and just read one section and get all of the information you want. So it's really great to read it in its entirety. All right, additional considerations in section 14. This is my absolute favorite section. Laurie and I are both dyslexia therapists as well. So, you know, this is something that's passionate to us, supporting our students around the state with dyslexia, supporting special education students in the tier process, students who have a 504 or need a 504 plan created, gifted student support. And then Sandy's on here again, you know, to talk to you today about some English learner supports. But I really like this additional considerations section. And in the end, we have the resources link in section 19. You will find an abundance of resources, but there's also resources woven throughout in each section. So in each section, you'll have resources specific to that topic. All right, interventions through distance learning.
Okay, good morning again. As Lori mentioned, my name is Matt Sheriff. I'm the newest member of the team and come from an administrative school level leader background. And I did have an opportunity at the end of last school year to help collaborate and work with families in providing online or virtual learning. And one of the things that we found very, very, very important is making sure that we had that strong collaboration among family and school staff in supporting instruction, specifically intervention plans and that were created and modified for students who needed the most help. And then it's necessary to focus on skills needed for students while understanding that lessons will be different from those provided face-to-face in the school setting. So we had to make sure that we were specifically tailoring instruction around the needs of our students. Okay, Laurie. So the great thing about virtual learning or distance learning is that intervention lessons may occur while other family duties are carried out. There's no set time during the day or evening when students can just jump on and log on the computer and work on a particular intervention and still have that blended approach when the instructor comes on to help facilitate instruction. So again, communication may take place after hours during a more focused time. Some parents are still actively working, so we have to be flexible in reaching out to them and having those conversations about instruction and what students are working on. And then skill building with continued student motivation and dedication of the student family and the school staff. Again, providing that that continued support for students so they can be successful. I think I have a little bit of lag as well. And then because there's so much going on with COVID-19, we want the intervention lessons to be stress-free, a stress-free learning period for students while being engaged and focused. We don't want it to be laborious or anything that the parents are having to struggle with. We want the parents to have a good understanding of what the interventions are and can easily intervene in the absence of the physical teacher until that teacher is available doing virtual learning. And then students are continuing to receive the support that they need in order to be successful. Interventions don't stop just because everything is virtual. We still have to provide specific interventions tailored to those individual needs and making sure that they're focused and engaged. Okay. We have to make sure, most of all, that we are focusing on the students who need the most help, looking at various data points to make sure that we're targeting the right students. So going back and looking at various screeners and diagnostic assessments to make sure that we have pinpointed who needs the most help. And the information that we gather or that you gather should identify specific gaps that the students is exhibiting and provide information on the deficit areas that should be addressed through distance learning. So what do interventions look like in the distance learning setting? So we know that distance learning has evolved throughout the years, and this graphic just illustrates the evolution of distance learning, where at first, starting at the very top, you had the different learning modes, and then the very first model we had was just a knowledge building, where you're just sitting and you're just acquiring knowledge, and it moved from just acquiring or building knowledge to problem solving, to thinking, being creative, collaborating, and now dialogue, where the teacher and the students can still have that good conversation and provide teachers can provide that blended learning approach where the students are working independently, but as well the teachers providing feedback and receiving feedback from the students based on the various distant learning platforms that are out there. So this is just an example of the different types of learning. Of course, we have the in-person learning, which are the small group interventions.
Are you still at the address? I'm sorry, I can't see you with the mask on. Okay. All right. You getting one? Who you getting? Okay.
Okay, we have in-person learning, which is a small group intervention with explicit instruction in deficit areas, may be designed to ensure a tiered level of support is delivered to all students. And then we have the at-home learning, which is more virtual, which is the virtual model. And it's necessary to communicate with families the importance of students completing assessments and assignments on their own. Students have more independent work with the virtual learning with a teacher facilitating via technology. And we also have to help parents understand that teachers are using the information to design the intervention that would best meet the needs of the students. So the hybrid model. In the hybrid model, the assessments, including diagnostics, are provided on a one-to-one basis in a small group setting. And that takes some planning out because, of course, we can't have everyone in the school setting. So we have to make sure that we plan that out and we're following all the COVID guidelines. But those are done face-to-face in a small group setting with the interventionist. Students can be provided instruction during the face-to-face setting and then practice from home virtually. And then progress monitoring may be conducted digitally digitally, with a virtual proctor that can sit with the students as they complete their assignments or assessments. So whatever the learning situation, interventions and supports will continue for students. We have to find what works for us in a given situation, but as the interventionist in the students that you're serving, again, it's important to find out what best works for you. And while addressing grade level content, you're also addressing the gaps that have been identified. So how can students benefit from distance learning? So this is a time when where we can make the foundation stronger for students using a blended strategy of grade appropriate work and fill in the gaps along the way. And teachers can provide positive intervention experiences through technology and using various means to connect with students. So here's some helpful tips in regards to distance learning. First, again, as I mentioned before, it's very, very important to have that good collaboration with the parents. So the interventionist should reach out to each parent so they understand what will be conducted during the intervention time, and then choose appropriate interventions to be conducted. Again, this should be done by the interventionist, and the students and the parents should easily understand what those interventions are and easily assess them at home. The interventionist should also conduct a parent training so the parent can understand the components of the intervention program. Because most of the time in a virtual learning situation, again, the students are working independently and the parents will have to provide some additional supports. So it's important that our parents are fully aware of the specific skill, the platform being used, and all the components that go along with the intervention so they can provide that support in the students so the students can be successful. And also this is a time and an opportunity to demonstrate the importance of students completing their own work. We want to stress that students are completing their own work during this time. You can also incorporate other subject areas to expose students to rich content areas, build vocabulary, fluency, and knowledge. And writing should be a part of the daily or weekly assignments. Vocabulary building activities may be incorporated during certain times of the day, of the daily schedule, and siblings may be tapped to assist with sorting and counting activities whenever appropriate. And now we move on to deepening parent and family supports.
Okay, so as Matt just said, it is extremely important to get in touch with families, to have conversation with them. Once you complete your screeners when school starts, immediately get in touch with families and discuss with them what the gaps are according to the screeners and according to the other data that you have reviewed concerning their student. Make sure that families have what they need for their children to learn. Especially in the secondary situation, you know, the content it's more difficult, it's more challenging. And sometimes parents, you know, we haven't been in school in these content area classes in a while, and we may need some additional support and guidance in helping our students at home as well. So just making sure that we are trying to give them all the supports that we can, because we don't want this to be a stressful situation in which mom or dad who is trying to lend support is frustrated, student is frustrated, and then they're not learning what they need to learn. Okay, so let's discuss Tier 1 supports, because Tier 1 supports is the absolute most important tier as far as I am concerned at the high school level, because, you know, we said earlier, due to scheduling and other things that affect high schools, you know, we have limited time available to pull students. If we can if we can address gaps for students at Tier 1, we can do so many things and close so many gaps. So all students receive Tier 1. Tier 1 is our good core evidence-based instruction. So in Tier 1, let's focus on creating learning environments that feel physically and psychologically safe for students and staff. So, hybrid learning or virtual learning it's different for students. So it's going to be, some will feel more safe in such a situation such as virtual, whereas some may be a little more apprehensive with contributing to conversation or engaging virtually. So we have to really work with our students at Tier 1 when we start to begin school in a few weeks, re-engaging students because they've been out for such an extended amount of time. So having great conversations to get our students motivated and re-engaged in learning, in their new type of learning. So we have to emphasize the importance of the school and community and the joy of learning. So we have to make sure that we are making it engaging and joyful for these students at Tier 1 to keep them motivated. So to create this community when we start back in a couple of weeks, we can discuss things that we have had in the news recently or things that have affected us here, in the U.S. We've got the virus. We can discuss the virus. We can have conversations about, which students had family members or friends who tested positive or, not naming names, however, but just if they were affected directly by the illness. School closures, what did students do when school closed? They can talk about how they participated in online learning. Some of them, though, will say, because secondary students will be very honest with you, some of them will say, I didn't participate in distance learning. So you guys can have those conversations about how important it is. They can talk about how when they go out in the community, how social distancing has changed, how things are, when we go to a doctor's appointment and we have to sit distances away from others, or to a restaurant and half of the tables are marked off because you can only sit at certain spaces. So, how social distancing has affected them, as well as how they are going to social distance when they're going to be in the building. You can discuss the nationwide protests that have been in the media, talk about how they feel about those and how they have affected their viewpoints about these and how they have affected their feelings and their mood. So some content area strategies for students at Tier 1 that we can use for differentiation, and we could use these in Tier 2 and Tier 3 as well, but they're really effective to use to differentiate for secondary students. Sometimes secondary teachers are a little bit apprehensive to dive into differentiation, because we have so many classes, we have to get all of this content area covered, but students they can really soar with these certain types of strategies implemented. So remember that the academic discipline should define the essential literacy skills. So sometimes we'll have a secondary teacher who, a math or a science teacher or social studies who will say, this student is struggling with reading and I'm not a reading teacher. I don't know how to help this student to learn how to read. But remember that as a content area teacher, such as a science teacher, that, there are essential reading skills that the student needs in order to be successful in the science classroom. So focus on doing some intervention at the some Tier 1 upgrades, some differentiation at the Tier 1 level to help the student with those types of skills. Highlighting keywords, that works across all content areas, but particularly with social studies, you're going to have maps, for example, and more timelines, using your graphics, helping them to understand the types of reading skills and practicing and model your skills of finding keywords, etc. Let them preview the reading selection and have conversation about maybe unknown vocabulary. Text coding is important. And when I say coding, there are so many different ways to code. You can get more in-depth with coding, but just a simple way for text coding would be boxing suffixes off of words. Many times students who are struggling readers don't follow through and read their suffixes. They don't understand that a suffix can change the type of word that they are reading. Boxing prefixes on words and having conversations about those. And again, using visuals, most students who struggle really benefit from having some type of visuals to help them to see relationships and to see how things work together, etc. Okay, tier 1 behavior is going to be Laurie.
Okay, so we're going to talk about tier 1 behavior. And with tier 1, I'm not sure if y'all are a PBIS district. I think you are. But this is where you have your core programs and your strategies that are provided for all of your students at the tier 1 level. And with tier 1 comes a lot of focus on your school culture and climate, and that kind of sets the tone. And then having just 3 to 5 broad school-wide expectations. And those are your expectations that you have, when you walk in the building, how you're behaving in the hallway, and just your general overall behavior in the classroom as well. And the purpose is to maximize achievement and increase their positive behavior. So here is just an example of how you can look at the overall tier 1 behavior and focusing on the students' social, emotional, and just overall behavior well-being. And so to start with that, you need to connect. So building those relationships between teacher and student. Check in with students daily and with their families to identify any supports that are needed, especially right now, especially in this virtual setting that we're going to have. So you're going to have high school students who are gearing up, ready to come to school, and now they're going to be at home, for the next several weeks, and then hopefully being able to transition into a hybrid setting. So keeping in mind that as much as teachers can build relationships with their students, and that includes with them sharing their own experiences this summer, like Jada mentioned, that's going to be a way that they can connect through this time. So there are different screeners that you can use for behavior. There are formal and informal screeners, and we can send you a list of those, and some of them are free. Some of them are just like a checklist if you're noticing any behaviors of these students. So students who require additional support may need tier 2 or tier 3 behavior support, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So establish a safe environment. And so we can do that even through our online virtual settings. And so, I've got 2 daughters that are going into high school this year. And one thing that they have already been doing this summer is they're having Zoom calls with each other. They'll set up a Zoom call with their friends. So they have become very tech savvy through this experience, and so they're going to be used to this. They're going to be used to getting online and having these calls. So just know that going into it, that they're going to have expectations of how this should unfold. So keeping that in mind, try to make it a positive experience for them. It's going to be probably tricky in the beginning as far as figuring out what's going to work best. And so have those clear expectations from the beginning. One thing that goes along with behavior is teaching the expected behavior. So just like we teach our academic skills, we need to teach our behaviors that we expect to see. We were on a call earlier this week with another district, and when they were doing their virtual learning in the spring, they noticed a lot of children just kind of laying on the couch, cuddle up in their covers, had their stuffed animals or sitting with their dog or cat. And for them, they didn't like that. They wanted them sitting up straight and tall at a table, almost like they were in school. So that's going to be up to the teacher to set that tone. Is that okay with her? If she's got more of a laid back personality, she may not mind that they're lounging around as long as they're getting their work done. So those are the types of behaviors that we're going to have to teach in this environment. And then continue to monitor the implementation of those expectations. So just making sure that once the teacher sets the expectations, then she's monitoring that to make sure that those are being met. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Access for All guide. It came out last year, and we came and did some trainings. We actually came to Hattiesburg and did a regional training. So some of y'all may have been in on that. But it is a guide to provide strategies and supports for our struggling learners. And so not necessarily students that are just in special education or students that are just in general ed. It's for all of our kids that can receive specific strategies and supports. And I'm sure y'all seen this picture. It's one of our favorites. And this is a quote from Rick Lavoie. Fair doesn't mean giving every child the same thing. It means giving every child what they need. And so, I always think about a child who needs glasses. If they need glasses, we make sure they have their glasses. And not every kid in the room is going to need glasses, but that kid's going to need glasses to be successful. So that is just always something that I think about and associating that with accommodations that students may need. Okay, let's see. There we go. So the Access for All guide works in all of these areas. So it's got supports for academic, social, emotional, physical, behavioral, speech, language, and organizational skills. And I'm not sure if it breaks it down, but like underneath academic, it'll have an area for dyslexia. So it really breaks it down further. So if this is a guide that you're not familiar with, I really recommend looking at it. It's very user friendly. If you go to the MDE website and use the search bar at the very top and just type in Access for All, and it'll take you to the link. It's easy. You can print it out or you can just look at it online, but it can give you a lot of accommodations that are allowable, and you can do them in the classroom. Some people associate the words modifications and accommodations with special education. So if you're more comfortable with the word adaptations, then use that word, because that's all you're doing. You're just adapting the experience that the children are having in the classroom. Their guidance is there to help students learn. So whether that is through an accommodation, a modification, the whole goal is to help our children learn. So accommodations and modifications, they're just types of adaptations that are made to the classroom environment, the curriculum, your instruction, or your assessment practices. And like I said, they're all laid out for you in the guide, and they keep the intent but change the delivery. And so I know that is something that is so important for y'all at the high school level. We don't want to change the intent of the curriculum. We know you have content area that you have to teach, that you're responsible for, and the children are responsible for learning. So that's why the guide is so helpful, because it shows you ways that you can change your delivery without changing the intent. And that's what's so important. Your grading is not changed or altered when you make accommodations for the students. However, modifications substantially change the content or curriculum, may impact the grading. So keep that in mind. I always think accommodations are like good classroom instruction. That's just good everyday teaching, what good teachers do. We accommodate, we see a need, and we make a change for that child. When you're modifying, that's when you're actually you could be actually changing the content or the curriculum, and that's where it could impact the grading. So I know that's kind of a fine line, and we use those words interchangeably, but they are different. And so if you have questions about it, go to that Access for All guide, because it really breaks down the difference. Okay, so if y'all have any questions about the guide, y'all can type that in the chat and we'll address that. But now I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and he's going to talk to you about the leadership role.
Awesome. As a leader, we know that everything begins and ends with leadership. So leadership is key in the intervention process, and leaders have to set a clear vision and expectations in the building as it relates to interventions, and making sure that they're carried out with fidelity and that they're effective. So we want to prep for success and allocate resources and build capacity. And it's not just people or financial or monetary resources, it's people resources as well. I like to reference a text or a book, um, Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he mentions about um, getting the right people on the right seat on the bus in order for a school to be successful. And the same goes with the MTSS process. And you have to make sure that you have the right people in the right place, and you're getting the bang for your buck as it relates to interventions, and you're building capacity, making sure that everyone understands his or her role in that area, and that they're sharing successes and what works and what didn't work. So you want to build that strong capacity um, in the area. So, and you also want to get everybody on board. And like I said, identify roles, and making sure that everyone understand what he or she should be doing um, in providing students with engaging interventions. One of the key parts as well is to review data. And you're going to look at various data points, your universal screeners that happen in the fall, winter, and the spring. You have your common assessments and your benchmark assessments. And all of that data is used to inform instruction. So it's important for a school level leader to make sure that members of his or her team are always immersed in the data, looking at trends, disaggregating the data to target specific skills needed for individual students. Again, once you use that data to identify deficit areas, you want to differentiate. And a lot of times teachers struggle with that, but the school leader can step in and help teachers and the interventionists in making sure that lessons are differentiated and tailored to specific needs based on the data. Also, another important role of the school leadership or school administrator is that of a coach, and making sure that they're working side by side with teachers, ensuring that the teachers understand their role and the interventionists understand their role. In providing instruction. So right there with the teachers doing model lessons, providing effective feedback, and continuous support through professional development. Also, creating an effective team, and this kind of goes back to the earlier slide where we're looking at roles and responsibilities. So it's important not only to build an effective team, but you have to make sure that the vision is a shared vision for the process, and making sure that everything you do is specific and measurable. You have specific and measurable goals for student improvement and learning. Ensuring that there's a school-wide system for storing and analyzing data. We had a data wall in the interventionist room. We had data walls in the hallway. Teachers had data walls in the classroom. And we also had an electronic system using I cannot, my thought left me. We had an electronic system um, using data on an Excel spreadsheet where the data is tracked. And I don't know why my thought just left me that quickly, but we used Excel spreadsheet to track and monitor data of all of our students. We just logged in their their diagnostic assessments, their benchmark assessments, and that way we can easily share the data amongst our team with each other, and it's just right there, and we can easily share it with the students as well. You definitely want students involved in understanding the data, and develop ways for teachers to review data in a timely manner. So having those data inquiry meetings where, again, teachers are looking at the data, disaggregating the data, and they are providing or using that data to make informed decisions on instruction, specifically for individual students. So they're in those meetings looking at the data, and they're making lesson plans. They're planning to remediate and or enrich. So it's not just to reteach, but also to enrich as well. And also, it is key for the leadership team, the principal administrator, to develop a communication plan to spell out how parents, school staff, district staff, and others will share successes, challenges, and potential solutions related to RTI. So it's important to have that communication piece so that everyone involved in the process understands the process and can work toward a successful end for all students. Okay. Tier 1 and Tier 3 academic interventions.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sandy.
Okay, all right. So I am having technology issues, so I am looking at the PowerPoint, but I'm just going to say when we're ready to go on to the next slide, and I really won't be sure exactly what you're looking at, so I'm just going to delay for a second after each slide. So in this section, we're going to talk about Tier 2 and Tier 3 academic interventions, and if you'll go on to the next slide, Lori. So identification during this COVID-19 pandemic. So just some things we want to keep in mind is that we really want to make sure that we are triaging our building equitably. We don't want to leave any particular groups of students out because say they're English learners or they're in special education or they are in our dyslexia therapy programs. Everybody should be triaged equitably. We want to make sure that we are collecting and analyzing actionable data. I know as a former building interventionist, sometimes teachers would catch me in the hall and say things like, this student really needs to be in Tier 2 or this student needs to be in Tier 3. And I'd say, okay, so what's going on with them? And they'd say, well, they just can't read. Well, I need something more than that. So we want to make sure that we have really actionable data. What are they really struggling with? Are they struggling with comprehension? Where's the data to prove that? Are they struggling with decoding? What data do we have that's going to back that up? We also want to continue that decision making as a team and make sure that we're communicating those gaps to families expeditiously. It's really important that we're doing that in a timely manner and we're being very clear to parents about what those issues are. Then on the next slide, we go on to talk about just some other aspects. So typically about 10 to 15% of our students are identified for Tier 2 intervention. And our best practice recommendation is for us to have 20 to 30 minutes every other day. However, we know that this fall things are going to have to be more flexible. So we need to make sure that we are really being very aware of any changes that we need to make with our strategies for implementing interventions. Also, due to the COVID pandemic, more of our students will have regressed, which will increase the number of students who might qualify for Tier 2 or Tier 3. And also schools that had higher numbers of non-participating learners during our spring and summer learning are likely to have a spike in students who would fall in that lower 25th percentile. So then on the next slide, we just talk about really continuing to look for the students with the most need for Tier 2 and Tier 3. So we may consider looking at the lowest percentiles. We might be looking instead of at that 25th percentile range, but in the 10 to 15th percentile for the students that we would consider for Tier 2 and Tier 3. We might take those students who are maybe in that 15th to 20th or 25th percentile and possibly create a watch list where we keep track of that data whenever we're thinking about placement. So just on the right, I just made a list of some possible data points we could consider because, of course, we don't have state assessments and maybe end of year assessments, and our grades from the end of year may look a little different than they normally did. So we might look at district diagnostic data that we implement, maybe the previous Tier 2 or Tier 3 data from last year, grades from last year, and I would really look carefully at those grades, looking at the first, second, and third term grades overall, because we know that fourth term was a little bit different. And also teacher implemented data. A lot of times teachers are, Laura, you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. A lot of times teachers are doing a quick assessment in their own classrooms. I know I did it a lot in reading and in math, just to see where do I need to pick things up, how well do kids remember what I expected of them from last year. So with English learners, oftentimes we would say that we would have students who had interrupted formal educations. Now all of our students have interrupted educations. So with that, we want to think about that watch list. If we are going to make that watch list for those students who are maybe in that 15th to 25th percentile, we could make sure that that Tier 1 core instruction is key during this waiting period. And as Jada said, really, Tier 1 is the most important tier that we're really focusing on getting those supports in. We want to make sure we are consistently checking that formative and summative assessment progress and documenting all the quantitative and the qualitative data. That qualitative data is important that we don't leave it out because we need to know what else is happening with kids. Are they just non-participatory in class and that's it? Is there something else going on with them? Maybe they're struggling a lot with stressors from home, especially at this time. We also want to possibly use data from a second screener to make the determination for Tier 2. And then on the right, I just created a watch list, an imaginary watch list that I might use. So I might list my students at certain grade levels and say, or in, certain areas and say, okay, these are the list of the students and this is who we're going to keep our eye on. So the teacher has that list. And then also, we as interventionists, when we're having those TST meetings, I know, when I'm with Ms. Johnson, I got to check with her on Mary and John and Joe and find out how those issues are going with them. So I can see what has she been doing, what's been working, what's not been working, how's it going for them. So we can really keep our eye on those students who are on that watch list. And on the next slide, we have some considerations for Tier 2 and Tier 3, just things to ask ourselves, like were they in Tier 2 or 3 prior to the shutdown? We might want to just take those students who are in Tier 2 and Tier 3 prior to the shutdown and put them back in the interventions. Were they digitally or remotely absent in the spring or summer? That could be a cause for why they have a bigger gap, but not necessarily a cause for them to be in tier 2 or tier 3, because some kids, as we know, are just going to pick right up and be able to pick up on getting in pace with everyone else. Also, we want to make sure we're asking ourselves, do we have those multiple data points that suggest a struggle? Remember, we never want to rely upon just one data point. Don't just take your diagnostic screener, if that's what you're using in your district. Don't just take that and use it and say, we're going to make blanket statements. We really want to make sure look at the whole child. And really the really big question too is the teacher seeing a significant need compared to the other students in the class? Our teachers are going to see more need from all of our students, but it's those students who really stand out and need much more support that we're going to consider for tier 2 and tier 3. Because of course our tier 1 instruction is really going to be amped up towards meeting those gaps for all of our students. And on the next slide, I'm just going to talk for a few slides about some considerations for English learners when it comes to MTSS. I want to make it perfectly clear. There are some misconceptions out there, but I want to make it perfectly clear that English learners are eligible for all services that all students are eligible for. And their EL services are not their intervention services. In EL services, they are working on language acquisition, and that does not necessarily touch on all the aspects that they may need support with. So before we implement interventions for English learners, we want to keep in mind that we should talk to everybody. We want to talk to the parents, the general education teachers, the EL teacher, and anybody who works with the student to really find out what's going on and why they're struggling. We want to look at all the data, and of course, we don't necessarily have MAP data or Lost Links data from last year, but we do have other diagnostic data. We have classroom data. We want to make sure any data that's available we examine. And we want to determine the deficit and select that intervention that's really going to specifically address the identified deficiency. That's really important with English learners, that we know, are they struggling with decoding because they learn to read in another language and they need to learn to read in English? Well, at the middle and high school level, our teachers may not have that skill set. So that's something that we really need to make sure we consider. How are we going to bring them up to speed so that they can read in English? Many of those skills that they have for reading in another language are going to transfer to English reading. However, we have to teach them those skills. On the next slide, we have some additional considerations for English learners. So we just want to keep in mind, we have to think about the amount of time the student's been in this country. If they've only been here for a month or two, we have to give it a minute. Let's give them time to get acclimated. They're not just learning a new language. They are learning a whole new culture, and it's really important that we give them that time and that support to get acclimated. We want to think about the quantity and the quality of interactions within this cultural experience. Many of our EL students, especially now after this COVID experience, have not really been around others who speak English and have really been isolated at home. So we really have to give them those opportunities to learn about the new culture, about our expectations for them in school, and also about giving them that time to get acclimated again. We want to think about the similarity or dissimilarity of their ethnicity or national origin to that of the U.S. So, think about it. We have some students who are coming to us from some very remote villages in Central America, and some students who are coming to us from places very far away like Yemen. And the culture is very different in those places. So we need to, again, give them that time to learn about our culture here in southern Mississippi. We also want to think about the degree of language proficiency. That's going to be a big consideration. On the next slide, just kind of some things to think about when we're thinking about our English learners. Sometimes we don't know, is this an issue of a difference in language or actually some disabilities that they're struggling with in academics? So just to determine those best supports, we want to think about, have we already provided additional support? And if so, what has it been? Has it been to meet the specific needs? Are we really addressing the specific needs of that student with the support that we've provided? And has the student made progress with the additional support? Maybe they just need more time with getting that continued additional support that we're providing. We also want to think about if the student can complete the same type of activity in their first language. If we know that they can complete it in their first language, then we know it's a language difference. And we also want to consider, is the difficulty due to a limited former educational experience? That's really important, because while all of our students have interrupted schooling right now, our English learners who are new to us may be coming from an educational background where they had limited formal education due to many different reasons. Okay, on the next slide, I have a scenario for you. So on this slide, I'm really going to depend on my team to help me with this, and I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself to respond or to type in the chat. So we have a secondary scenario. So there's a 14-year-old student from Yemen who enters school with no English and interrupted schooling from his birth country. He, let's say he's in 9th grade, since we're at the high school level here. So I'd like you to add in the chat, and if Lori or Jada or Matt could share that with me, or if you can unmute yourself and share with us what you think are some options we might have for this student who's struggling in our classes. So if you just want to unmute yourself or add it in the chat. Lori, are you getting anything in the chat?
No, nothing has popped up in the chat that I can see.
Okay, so either we have no connectivity or y'all are just shy, and it's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and give some possible solutions. This is the kind of thing we come across with kids oftentimes. We really want to have that opportunity to talk and share with each other about some ways to do that, but to support the students. It's really important that we as a team create these dialogues with each other about how best to support a student. So I have some possible solutions. We could continue the student at Tier 1, and they could get intensive instruction on language acquisition from the EL teacher, along with high quality instruction specifically designed to meet their needs from the general education teachers. Now, it's really important to keep in mind that we have some students who are going to come to us who may have interrupted schooling, but whose parents are highly educated and they just couldn't go to school, especially like from someone from Yemen, because it's a war-torn country and it wasn't safe for them to school, but maybe they were continuing to learn at home. So we want to really make sure we're looking at students very specifically and what their background is and what their needs are. We may decide that they should be placed in Tier 2 to meet some specific academic deficiencies, such as being beginning math or reading instruction in English, or depending on the severity of the interrupted schooling, they may need much more intensive instruction on skills not normally taught at this grade level, such as beginning reading skills in English. And while we have excellent teachers who are highly qualified in their field in English at the secondary level, they may not have the skill set to teach those beginning skills, which are normally taught at the elementary level. So it's really important that we really find the best way to support the students. On the next slide, which is slide 75, Laurie, just to make sure I'm on the right spot with y'all. So just some ways to help plan intervention supports for English learners. So there is in our English learner guidelines, which are on our EL page, and I believe, Laurie, that your copy has a link at the bottom. Am I correct?
Yes, it's there, the tiny URL. It's at the bottom.
Yes, thank you.
You're
Okay, so in that guidelines, we have several resources that can help support you. A lot of times with English learners, we really don't know where to begin to start them for Tier 2 or Tier 3 because we don't speak the same language. So we have one sort resource in there. It's called the BICS CALP. It's the Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills or Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency Skills form. And that just helps to give you, your team, a place to start. You know, can the student do this? Can the student do that? And let me just say, there are lots of BICS CALPs out there. This is just one that we developed and adapted so that it's got issues from the 4 domains of language acquisition. On the next slide, so again, just continuing that talk about the leadership team or the TST, we want to make sure that we are developing a building-wide plan, anticipating that there are going to be larger numbers of struggling students, and then revisit and revise it if needed. We want to make sure we're planning for those higher numbers of referrals and how are we going to support teachers when they feel like they don't quite know what to do. Let's just all plan ahead. We want to make sure we're reviewing academic screeners and familiarizing ourselves with the reports and identifying and organizing resources and materials. And really just staying calm and replacing chaos with order, because it will feel a bit chaotic at first, especially, I mean, we all know things are changing for us, seems like on a daily basis with this pandemic on how school will be conducted. On the next slide, just some strategies and routines for all students who want to make sure that we're constantly checking for clarification for them and helping them as we clarify misconceptions for them. We want to make sure we're using visual imaging to support them and teaching them to use things like mnemonic devices to help them remember information. And really, the last two, I think, are really very important, and that's self-advocacy. So many times as a classroom teacher, I would come across a grade or even like a behavioral issue, and I would see that the student either did really poorly on the assessment, or parents would call me with an issue related to some other student, and I never heard anything about it before I saw the grade, and now I've got to intervene. Or the parent called me and I was like, they've never said anything to me about this issue. So we want to teach them to be advocates for themselves and to feel confident that we're going to help them through issues, either behavior issues or academic issues. And really also helping them to organize. If we are organized together and helping them to be organized themselves, that can make a huge difference for students. And then finally on the next slide, a possible action is to consider, because we're anticipating that we'll have higher numbers of students who struggle, consider using non-instructional personnel. So we can have PTO members or parent or grandparent volunteers, maybe some other high school students or some college students. I know a lot of times local civic or religious organizations like to volunteer, or after school program workers who like to support our students. Just when we're trying to see, maybe a student doesn't need necessarily intervention, but they may need remediation. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the support and getting as many people on board to support those students as possible.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. We made that work with you having to call in on the phone. So we are going to talk now about Tier 2 and Tier 3 behavior needs. Let's see. Okay, so just an overview. You know, thinking about when Tier 1 is not enough. So you know those kids that you're going to have coming back, or the kids that you're going to be working with virtually, and we're going to have to re-engage them. They've had a long time of being out of that classroom setting. So it's going to take some work on the side of the teacher to get them re-engaged and reestablish those routines. And like I said earlier, those expectations. And so when Tier 1 is not enough, then that's when we look at Tier 2. Tier 2 is typically 15 to 20% of our students, and they're just students that need additional help. And that can be through a check-in and check-out type setting where they're checking in maybe with the school counselor or someone that they have a good relationship with. If they're on the football team, it may be a coach. If they're in the band, it may be their band teacher. So it needs to be someone that they have a good relationship that they are checking in with. And we know that that is the highest, that's the biggest Tier 2 intervention in our state. That's what most of our schools use at the Tier 2 level. And you're just reducing their current incidence of problem behavior when you're using this. So any students that have that at risk for engaging in behavior problems. So Tier 3 is a much smaller percentage of our students. It's just 1 to 5%. And these are intensive behavior issues. And so with that, they're going to need more intensive supports. So this may include time where they're going to see the counselor. Instead of just checking in with them, it may be where they're having to sit down and really have more of like a structured time meeting with them one-on-one or in a small group setting. You see on here where it's got to complete a functional behavior assessment, an FBA, and we recommend that at Tier 3. It's not required. You're not required to complete an FBA until you are referring for a child find, but just keeping that in mind that it gives you a lot of information on the student and ways that you can support them, and then developing a comprehensive intervention support plan. And like I said before, if you need any examples of those, y'all reach out to Ginger. You'll get her email at the end of the PowerPoint, and she can guide you if you need help with any of that. And with our students, there's always a why. You know, why, we ask ourselves, why are they acting this way? There's always a reason, you know, and you look at this list here. Why do we cook food? So we can eat. Why do we go shopping? To buy things. You know, why do we ask questions? To get an answer. So there's always a purpose for their behavior. And so it's our job at the school to figure out why they're acting this way. And I always think of, you know, being a teacher, an interventionist, it's like being an investigator. We have to get to the root of the problem. Okay, so what interventions are available? And these are interventions that I have used for years, and I trust them. They're just good resources. The RTI network is a great place to go and get just overall information on the intervention process and what the 3 tiers will look like. So if you're needing just more of those fundamental ideas of what it should look like, go there. It's a great trusted resource. Another one is interventioncentral.org. Same thing. They do a lot of research, but they also have actual and practical interventions. So if you once you find that deficit area, then you can go in and it'll give you like lesson plans, structured interventions that you can do with your students. Another thing that Intervention Central just released with Jim Wright, he released an at-home intervention plan. So it's almost like a way to document the interventions that you're wanting to take place at home. And so it is linked on our website. So if you go to our intervention page and click on the MTSS summer webinar series, you will see it listed there. And you can use that as a template. You don't have to use it just as we have it. We have it as like in a PDF form, but you can take that and make it fit for what you need. So if y'all need more of a specific, almost like you're documenting what you're talking about in the meeting, but now I need a plan of what is expected of the student when they are at home, and what's expected when they come back to school, if we come back in the hybrid setting. So use that as a template, guys. So take it, adapt it, use it how you need it. That's what it's there for. It's just a resource. So another website I really like is pbisworld.com. So it's different than pbis.org. It is a place that you can go and get interventions for behaviors. So when you click on it, it'll have a whole list of behaviors, different things, hyperactivity, attention, you name it, and it's on there. Well, when you click on it, it'll give you a list of questions. Is the child exhibiting these behaviors? When you click yes at the bottom, it'll give you tier 2 intervention strategies and tier 3 strategies. So I really like it for that. So if you're needing specific behavior strategies, go there. The next one is What Works Clearinghouse. And you see the website here, ies.ed.gov. You can go there if you're looking for intervention. So if you need evidence-based interventions, you can go there and they will be listed, and they're listed by content area. So if you are looking for science specifically, if you're looking for, I think history is on there, definitely ELA, math, all of the usuals, behavior, it's all on there. So you click on it and it'll give you a list. So I had a call with them earlier this summer, and one of the things that we discussed was, when I go in there and I'm looking for evidence, I have to really dig in to find the evidence. So hopefully they're going to update that so it's easier to see, what evidence does it provide? Strong evidence, moderate evidence, things like that. And then the last one is the Florida Center for Reading Research. And we know that that is one that has been around forever, and it has great strategies and supports. So even though we are in a virtual setting, we still need our interventions to be evidence-based and structured. We need progress monitoring to continue, and we still want them implemented with fidelity. And so how is that going to look? It's going to take setting up a schedule and the students knowing when they're expected to get on and complete their interventions. And if that's a computer-based program, it's going to take communication. And like I said from the very beginning, setting up those expectations so students know what we expect of them. So we'd always encourage our teachers and interventionists to follow the structure of the program. So if you're using a specific program, follow that structure. But also, we have to be flexible with everything that's going on. That flexibility is key. It's going to take us being flexible on the teacher side and flexible on the student side. So if you see that a student needs a different approach, try something different. If y'all set up something in August, well, by the time September rolls around, if that's not working, try something else, okay? You're not married to that one approach. Use your good teacher judgment. You know, that's why it's important to get to know your kids, get to know their home environments, and so then you can make those adjustments as you need to. Okay, so Jada is going to talk to you about the implementation model, and I may jump into if I need to add any other comments. But Jada, I'm going to let you take over this part.
Okay, so the documentation packet was created to assist districts, schools, and educators with documenting those supports that you're implementing for students. It is a requirement per the state board policy. So all students who are Tier 2 and Tier 3 must have a documentation packet completed. It does provide the means to complete documentation for students K-12 plus our pre-K students. Okay. A piece of the documentation packet that is very important is this teacher growth rubric. So this is in the Tier 1 section. This refers to our Tier 1 instruction as classroom teachers. So my administrator would come in to make sure that my instruction is differentiated, that I have classroom management, that I have routines and procedures, that I'm doing everything that I can at the Tier 1 core instruction level to make sure that my student is gaining and learning those standards and advancing through the curriculum. The student profile sheet contains information about the student that's basically a quick overview, everything that you kind of need to know right off about the student. So it will have a course performance, current course performance, behavior. It will let us know how many times the student has been referred to the office for situations. It will let us know if the student has an attendance issue, if the student has previously been retained, if they already have an IEP, or if they are an EL student, et cetera, those special population students. It will have information about screener results, medical information. Medical information is very important. You know, parents share that with us. We need to make sure that it is documented once they share it. And also hearing and vision screening to make sure that our students aren't struggling because they simply can't hear the instructions or can't see the overhead projector.
Hey, Jada, I just wanted to say that we got a question yesterday from a district about hearing and vision screeners. You know, what's that going to look like? So as of right now, if you're moving children into Tier 2 and Tier 3, and they haven't had a recent hearing and vision screener, they will need that at some point. So we know with y'all being virtual, you're not going to be able to do it right now, but hopefully when we transition back to hybrid, you can get them on the days that they're in the building. So that is something that we'll still need for your documentation, because we always want to be able to rule that out, that it's not a hearing issue or a vision issue. But don't worry about it right now while you're going virtual. Just kind of hold on to that, but know that that's something that you need to do when they do get back in the building. So I wanted to address that because we had that question yesterday.
Okay. Also, with this student profile sheet, we know that some districts have programs or platforms that house much of this information in a condensed version. Basically, you can print this off. If you have information about office referrals, retentions, et cetera, you can staple it to the profile sheet itself and write "See attached" on the profile sheet. So if we come in and you provide us with a folder or a binder for a tier student, when we open it, we want to see this quick overview right up front, you know, to have a full picture of this student before we start to look at what interventions are in place. So that's why it's really important to keep it together in the binder. So we have a 912 profile sheet that is similar to the K-8, but this one contains your state testing information as well. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about Section 2A, which refers to your Tier 2 supplemental instruction within the general classroom, because typically in most situations, the classroom teacher is providing that Tier 2 instruction. Make sure that we review the profile sheet so that we know the student. Make sure we know if the student already has a 504 in place, but know your students as they come to you. Once we've determined deficit areas, we will decide what is the duration and frequency of the intervention. We're going to implement an intervention that addresses specific weaknesses. So we want to make sure that we address the weakness with an appropriate intervention that actually matches up to that data where we see those deficit areas. We're going to decide how we're going to progress monitor our students. What's going to be our progress monitor method? That's going to be recorded. And in some situations, we use more than one progress monitor piece in order to get a full picture of what's going on with the student and if they're growing. Okay, so we're going to use the Tier 2 and Tier 3 supplemental instruction forms to describe the deficit area, identify the intervention that we're going to utilize. We're going to, again, determine the evaluation criteria to be used. So that's going to be how we're going to evaluate to see if the student is growing and closing gaps. We have to establish a goal. In our 4-step process, it discusses how we have to establish a goal for the student. What is it we want this student to be able to do that they currently cannot do, that he or she currently cannot do, and create that goal and create that aim line according to that goal. Where do we want the student to be? What do we want them to show as far as progress monitoring? Okay, so Section 2A, again, supplemental instruction. So this is what we were talking about a moment ago. This is actually the piece that you record this information on. So in the left-hand column, this is where you will tell what is the deficit area. What is the student having difficulty with? In the center column, you will actually describe what is taking place during your supplemental small group instruction. What exactly are you doing with the student to close those gaps? In the right-hand column, this is where you provide your evaluation criteria. It has to be something that is measurable. So this is where you will state what you will use to progress monitor for this particular intervention. Okay, Laurie, you can change the slide and I may have a delay over here. Okay, so for Tier 2, we have integrity checks. We need to make sure that integrity checks are provided at equal intervals during the intervention process. So these are to show that the intervention is taking place with integrity as it is intended to take place. And, because it would be very easy to document on a piece of paper that an intervention is occurring, but we have to make sure that we are actually doing teacher-led intervention or computer-based and teacher-led intervention, and that we are actually working with that student. So that's what those checks are for. In 2C, we have a progress monitoring piece. You may document your progress monitoring on this piece, but sometimes we'll see where individuals or schools have decided that they're going to create their own graph for progress monitoring, which is totally acceptable, and they'll just attach it and write "see attached" on this original graph. Or you may have a computer program in which you can generate the progress monitoring for that computer program as well. All right. The teacher support team referral and meeting form. This can be used for our 20-day students who will populate our MTSS list that we are going to meet on to determine how to best serve them these first 20 days of school. So in addition to that, it can be used for the teacher to simply refer a student to have a meeting to decide whether or not the student needs to move into the tier process. So I heard Sandy say earlier, you know, that people would follow her down the hall, or teachers may contact her in the hall, you know, because you grab a person when you see them because it's on the tip of your tongue or your thoughts, and you're thinking, well, let's go ahead and talk about this. I'm going to tell the interventionist, or I'm going to tell my administrator that I'm worried and I want to have a TST meeting. But this just helps us to document that, because we want to make sure that we meet for each student who has some type of, that the teacher has some type of concern. So this is just great to refer for academics and behavior. All right, this is just a sample of a parent notification letter. Now, we require that parents are notified when a student is a Tier 3 student. At Tier 2, it's not a requirement, but as a classroom, I mean, as a school interventionist, a former school interventionist, and as classroom teacher, I just believe, and we've had these conversations within the office, it's really best practices to notify the parent about Tier 2 placement. Because, you know, if the student is to move to Tier 3 at a later date, as mom, you know, I might say, well, I didn't realize that this struggle was occurring. So we want to make sure that we're constantly communicating with parents. But this is just a sample letter that you can send. Of course, if you need to contact parents by phone, which of course with COVID might be your means, or with a Zoom call or whatever, that you're also documenting that contact as well in some form. Okay, so this intensive intervention documentation piece is pretty much the same as the Tier 2 piece. As far as on the left, you will write the deficit area. You will tell what the student is struggling with, where they're having trouble, what you need them to know that they currently do not know. In the center, you will describe steps that will occur as far as your instruction during intervention time. And on the right, you will write the information about how you will progress monitor and what you will be measuring when you progress monitor. So if a student moves from Tier 2 to Tier 3, they would have the supplemental piece in their documentation packet, as well as this intensive intervention. If a student's intervention changes, let's say the student is Tier 3 and the intervention changes, if you have enough area or enough space left on this documentation piece, on this section 3B, to write in the changes about the intervention, that is fine. But sometimes you have to just move to a clean section 3B sheet and just put that in the folder as well, include that. I wouldn't suggest pulling out intensive documentation or the Tier 2 documentation sheet if they change intervention, because you want to make sure that you keep that paper trail so that someone who doesn't know the student, if they come in, they can see what has occurred over time. Okay, and this Tier 3 progress monitoring sheet, section 3C, much similar to section much similar to the Tier 2. So we're going to make recommendations based on our progress monitoring. We can use this when, you know, to review for documented reviews, as well as a cumulative documented review. I just want to caution you to not only look at a progress monitor chart when looking at you know, when making decisions, make sure that we're looking at the whole child. And particularly, you know, with younger students, for example, if I were to do a reading probe and want to record words read per minute, and if it is 5 minutes until recess, then I may not get an accurate count. So sometimes I might have a dip a particular week, you know. So just making sure that we are taking into consideration situations, what's occurring when the child's progress monitored, so that if we do see dips, we know why we're seeing dips. Okay, so sometimes we will have a student, and in our TST meeting, we need to decide Are we going to change the intervention? If the student is not making progress, are we going to change the intervention? Are we going to move the student from tier 2 to tier 3, or just try a different intervention within the current tier? Determine which students need a comprehensive assessment. Some students we might decide could possibly have a reading disorder, and we need to refer them to the MET team to see if that student qualifies for a 504 or a comprehensive evaluation. So as a team, we look at this data. Now, one thing I do want to say is that there are times when we may meet as a MET team, and we may decide that a student currently does not need to move forward for a comprehensive evaluation, but we can revisit that. So if the team makes that decision, it can be revisited at a later date. So it's not an end-all be-all, this is our decision. So we constantly continue to provide intervention and look at that data. Just like in the beginning of the training, we looked at our component wheel, and we talked about how it's constantly moving and how we're constantly revisiting data and revising if needed. Okay, so this is what we were just talking about, just in a chart form that's easy to see. So as we examine our data, we also look at rate of progress. So different students might have different rates of progress. Remember, this is not a one-size-fits-all. For example, Laurie and I, being dyslexia therapists, we know that many times students' reading level they're growing, they're gaining level, they're moving up as far as their grade equivalent. But it's slow. It can be very slow progress sometimes with some students. And then one day it just clicks and they just take off running, and you just are amazed at how quickly they'll grow from that point. So we have to, as a team, discuss each student and their rate of progress and what we expect as far as that particular student. So they may not all grow at the same rate. So we may decide to try a different intervention. We may decide to stick with the same intervention that we're currently in. And I'm talking about, for example, if a student is in dyslexia therapy, sometimes it will take a little longer for that progress. So I may decide to keep the student in that particular dyslexia therapy intervention, but I may decide that I need to change the intervention or move to a child find study. And if the child find study, again, if it's not found that we need to move on, that doesn't mean that we can't revisit that. So it is very important that we understand that Child Find is the ongoing obligation to identify, locate, and evaluate all children suspected of a disability who might need special education services and related services as a result of those disabilities. So we can never assume. So we must always make sure that we consider. And also, I would just like to say that, you know, if a parent requests testing and a student is currently not in intervention, we still must meet and look at what's going on with that student and look at what data we have available as far as classroom data, past data. Maybe they've been in intervention in the past, but we're going to make sure that we address that parent's concern. Also, other people may request child find studies. A bus driver could request a child find study, a cafeteria worker. So making sure that we are taking those child find studies very seriously when we have a request, when we receive a request, because we have a certain number of days to meet to discuss this student when we receive those requests.
Okay, so looking at how to support at home and provide those supports to your parents. So things that parents are wanting to know. Does your school have an interventionist? You know, is an interventionist going to be reaching out to them to talk to them about the programs that they'll be utilizing at home? Are you having TST meetings? So they need to know if the TST meetings are being conducted and if they're being invited to those meetings. If you're holding those meetings virtually, then you can invite the parents to join as well. If they can't, then send home the information, all your decisions that you decide. So if you decide to move them to tier 3, then make sure you're informing parents of those decisions. And then progress monitoring. So any information that you have as far as their progress, just making sure that you're keeping parents updated on all of that. As far as communication goes with your parents, making sure that you're communicating in multiple ways. So if you're sending out emails, are you also sending out like a group text message? Do you have other ways that are set up, like through Remind or a GroupMe account? Just making sure that we're reaching out in multiple ways. Some parents may not have access to the technology, so we may have to still do phone calls. We just want to make sure that we're getting in touch with them in different ways, and then streamlining those efforts because, as a classroom teacher, you have so many parents and so many students to reach out to. So just making sure that you are doing what's effective for you as well. And then there are so many apps available, and I believe I've got some here in the slides so I can share those with you. And so many of them are free, or they are free, and then they have a paid portion as well. But you can definitely utilize the free ones. And then pay attention to your reply settings, because they may be every time a parent accesses the information you send out, you may get a notification. So just go in there and work in your settings, and you can set it up the way you need to. But you can create short videos, which I really like as a parent, getting like a short, quick how-to video. There are definitely going to be times where you have to sit down and you have a long meeting, or where you're trying to explain something and it takes time to explain. But whenever you can just send out a short, quick message for parents and for students, then they're able to access that information and move on. Okay, so I didn't have those slides in here with the different apps available, but I know Canva is one. I mentioned Remind and GroupMe. If you are using Google, I think it's called Google Voice, where you can call parents without them seeing your phone number. So there are a lot of different ways that you can utilize that. So any questions that you have, we have a few minutes left. So any questions that you want us to address before we go? Just remember to be flexible, and as you are coming upon new situations and you aren't sure about something, reach out to us. Just email us, because we get a lot of questions that way, especially with us being kind of in and out of the office right now. Email us and one of us will get back to you as soon as we can. If it's a question that maybe pertains more to special education and we're not sure, well, we have relationships with that office, and so we can reach out to them and get guidance for you. So definitely reach out if anything comes up. And remember to be open and honest with parents. If you're not sure about something, let them know, because, it's all about that transparency, especially right now, and making sure that you are encouraging the parents to do their best, encouraging the students to do their best, because this time, it's just a time of unknown for all of us. Establishing that good communication so parents know how they can get in touch with you. One of the things that I always like to mention is, if you're establishing time for parents to call you, and it may need to be in the evenings, well, try not to do that every night of the week, because you need your downtime with your family as well. So maybe you're setting up time for parents to call Monday and Thursday nights, where the rest of the nights you have off. So it's almost like you need to preserve time for yourself too, because if not, it'll take over your whole life. And I know that's kind of what it feels like right now anyway. So try to preserve some time for yourself as well. It's new ground for everyone. We are all in this together, and I sit on a lot of calls with other states, and everyone is feeling this way. Everyone is unsure and just trying to make the best decisions for their students and their teachers. So we just want to thank you for everything that you do at your school and in your district, and all the efforts that you are doing for your community. Okay, so I'm going to switch over here are our contacts. So you see me here. I'm L. Weathersby. Jada is J. Brantley. Matt is M. Sheriff. Now, Ginger, she's the one that wasn't on the call today. So any specific behavior questions. And she also works with our special education office. So any child find specific questions, she's really good at helping with that, as well as 504. So she's G. Kessler at mdek12.org. And then Sandy is S. Elliott. So any questions before we move on? I don't know if anything, do y'all see anything in the chat box?
Wait, I just wanted to say thank you. We will be contacting you. What we're going to do is we're getting ready to plan a district meeting to kind of meet with everyone, interventionists, administrators, and so forth, to come up with a plan so that we can make sure that we're rolling this out correctly. Because like we said, we have to be flexible, and it's going to be a little difficult being that we are virtual. So you will be hearing from us, but I would love it if you all would share the video and share the PowerPoint. I know I had some team members who were kind of in and out because we have other professional developments going on today as well.
Yes, ma'am.
But thank you all for the information. It did give us a place where we can start, and we will just move forward from there.
Good. Well, so I'll stop the recording here in just a second, and then it takes a little while. I'll have to convert it, but then as soon as I do, I will send it to you along with the PowerPoint slides, so you'll have both of those. Okay.
Team, if you all have any questions that you need answered now, you can go ahead and unmute. If there's anything you would like to ask while we have the ladies and gentlemen on the line.
We're all good at the high school, Ms. McNair.
Thank you. Okay, Lori or Jada, you all can carry on. If we have any other questions, look, you will be hearing from me.
Okay. Well, thank y'all, and we hope you have a great start, and you'll be getting this information from me a little bit later today. I'll get it sent to you, okay?
Thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.